Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have read in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a graphic novel that I read, one that is about dystopian futures, fascism, and vigilantes. A book that is by an author that I've been checking into and liking his work. I am referring to V for Vendetta by Alan Moore, with art by David Lloyd, Steve Whitaker, and Siobhan Dodds. I got this from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. For those who don't know, I've talked about Alan Moore on this channel before, so I don't think I need to go into too much detail. But he wrote The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, The Killing Joke, which I've read, and Watchmen, which I've also read, as well as a number of other comic books. Kind of one of the big cheeses of the comic book industry, known for writing well-regarded stories in his time. I don't know too much about David Lloyd. Apart from the fact that he's written for, or he's drawn for Marvel and other comics in the past. Not a big fan of his art style, and I'll explain why later. That's just an issue that I have. I was aware of V for Vendetta before. I had watched the movie. I actually really enjoyed the movie because it has Hugo Weaving as the voice of V, and it has Natalie Portman in a pretty good role. Pretty decent movie, directed by the Wachowskis. So it could be either really good or really bad, like Clad Atlas and Jupiter Ascending. But it's one of the really good ones that they've made. So it does have a lot of differences from the book, but I think they're both good in their own right, even if the movie does kind of forego some of the themes of the book. But without further ado, let's get to the graphic novel at hand. I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So V for Vendetta takes place in the dystopian future of 1997-1998. The future when it was written, because Alan Moore wrote this throughout the 80s, published it in 87 and 88, so he was offering a glimpse of a potential future. Even if it didn't take place in 97 or 98, it could take hold in other times. This takes place in the United Kingdom after a fascist uprising led by the Northfire group took over and just started oppressing everybody and installing their white supremacist beliefs into the government and into everyday society. So that's where we find ourselves at the start of this story. Evey Hammond, a prostitute, I want to say. I'm not quite sure what she does throughout the story. But she is walking through London when she is attacked by the Fingermen, the roving gang of people who attack those who are... They attack social deviants, it seems, although they seem to attack everyone. They say that they are going to possibly rape Evie, but then a masked man in a Guy Fawkes mask shows up and saves her, kills the Fingermen, and then he blows up Parliament, which shocks Evie, but he takes her to his shadow gallery hideout in order to lie low for the time being. At this point, Evie starts talking to V, and we get a bit of a background on Evie. She was alive prior to the Northfire takeover when everything started getting bad and there was war and chaos in Great Britain. Her mom died and her father was taken away, and she didn't know where her father ended up. And so V, on the other hand, is a public menace. The government does not seem to like V as he engages in counterinsurgency to whatever the Northfire group is doing, and they consider him to be a terrorist, although they don't understand his goals or intentions in doing this terrorism. A short while later, he attacks Louis Prothero, who is the voice of Fate Fate being the supercomputer that allows them to surveil the greater population of the United Kingdom. Prothero is confronted by V, and V essentially points out that Prothero was the commander at the Larkhill Institution, where V was held prisoner for some time, and so he ends up causing a mental breakdown in Prothero, not killing him straight out, but Prothero is damaged and is just repeating "Mama, Mama" over and over, and so it appears that V has gotten some semblance of revenge or vengeance for whatever happened to him at Larkhill. Evey wants to participate in whatever V has going on, his freedom fighting, so she dresses up in a Lolita outfit and sort of gets in good with a bishop who has a thing for younger. He's a pedophile essentially, and so while she's distracting him, V breaks in and kills the bishop. And then when coroner Delia goes to investigate the bishop even further, she realizes that V was at Larkhill, and he escaped when he managed to use explosive equipment and to break out. And so V comes for Delia at that point and gives her a painless death, since she regretted her actions of torturing everybody at the Larkhill Institution. A short while later, V breaks into the television headquarters of the Northfire Group and gives a public address where he encourages everyone to revolt in a year's time, as the government is fascist and is oppressing everyone, and so it benefits them to rise up. Meanwhile, Evey talks with V on the street. She points out that V is very violent in his endeavors, and she's not really sure who V is, and she has her suspicions that he might be her missing father, but V asserts that he's not her father, and then he abandons her in the street, as she doesn't seem to want to be around him at that point in time. Evey takes up with a man named Gordon, but he is shortly killed by the fascist fingermen, and Evey plots to kill one of the fingermen who was responsible, but she is kidnapped seemingly by the police and taken to a detention center where she is interrogated. People are asking questions about who V is and why she's associated with him. There's even a point where they try to make her sign a statement saying that she was harassed and coerced into helping V in his terrorism, but she refuses to sign. And at the same time, she learns about Valerie, a woman who was detained for being gay. Her wife was killed, or was made to kill herself by the state, and all of the films she starred in were burned. Eventually, Valerie realized that the only thing she has to give her life to prevent this fascist government from truly winning, and so she was willing to do that. Meanwhile, Evey realizes the same thing and decides that she'd much rather die than give up V. And at that point, it's all revealed pretty cruelly that V was running this whole thing, that it was all an illusion. And so he tells her that she now has her freedom because the fascist government can't kill her to take anything else away from her. And she's pretty upset, rightfully so, but she comes around to his side of seeing things. V begins to blow up more buildings, which lead to more protest and anger on the part of the people who are realizing the government is fascist and oppressive, and they hold protest and start looting and rioting, and it becomes too much for the current government, who begin to turn on one another, and they all kill each other as a result, so there's no one really there in the government anymore. So even England's leader is shot by somebody who viewed him as responsible for the death of a loved one. And so V is approached by Detective Finch, who is investigating him throughout the story, and Finch manages to get a shot off and mortally wounds V, although V asserts that he can't be killed because ideas can't be killed, or some lame thing like that. So there's a whole bunch of disarray at this point. Evey assumes V's identity and takes on an apprentice, much in the way V took her on. She kickstarts the revolution, essentially, leading people against the oppressive Northspire government. And then she sends a train to Downing Street with V on it to give him a proper Viking funeral as he requested. And this also allows her to blow up Downing Street, the final act that symbolizes total and complete revolution and anarchy. And then as the story ends, Finch leaves as it's seemingly like there's no room for someone like him in this new world. And so that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit to talk about with this story. It's an Alan Moore story, so of course it's going to have a lot of depth and a lot of things to pick apart. One theme that shows up quite frequently in this story is that of anarchy. The idea, according to at least Alan Moore and to be in this story, anarchy is a world without leaders, without oppressive leaders. It's ruled by the people, although there are no rulers in particular, and it's total freedom, voluntary order rather than controlled order as you would find in a fascist government. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you here. Is this the land of do as you please? No, this is only the land of take what you want. Anarchy means without leaders, not without order. With anarchy comes an age of Ordung, or true order, which is to say voluntary order. This age of Ordung will begin when the mad and incoherent cycle of Verwung that these bulletins reveal has run its course. This is not anarchy, Eve, this is chaos. And so it seems, according to V, that anarchy, there's order in anarchy. It's just, people still have their freedom, and there's not an organized system for which people can take advantage of later on down the road. But in order to get to anarchy, a state of anarchy at least, you need to have this chaos for people to throw off the shackles of oppression and recognize who their oppressors are, and then fight them and revolt, which would allow for a system where the people have the total control now, rather than the oppressive leaders who wish to harm those individuals. So V argues in the story, throughout the story, that anarchy is necessary to fight fascism. That fascism seeks to hurt people, the most oppressed in society, the most marginalized. Like fascism is always going to hurt those people and seek to eliminate them so that you can have purity, a national sense of identity of one kind of group more often than not. And so you need this anarchy to recognize this and to engage in violence against the state. It seems like terrorism is necessary in those instances. I'm not going to say whether terrorism is good or bad, or freedom fighting for that matter. But anarchy is sometimes necessary to raise awareness of a problem and to address it. Then you also have anarchy versus justice, where it's clear that V is talking about justice a lot of the time, but I don't think he means true justice, because in a system of justice, you preserve the status quo by punishing those who offend. And if you preserve the status quo in a state of fascism, you're left with more fascism. The Northspire people will be held accountable, but more people will replace them, and down the road you'll have another problem like you see in V for Vendetta. But anarchy is better because the people take back control, and then you don't have a system where those, like the Northspire people, can take control and do bad things in the United Kingdom or anywhere else. I like how Alan Moore compares and contrasts anarchy with justice and anarchy with fascism. He doesn't simply just say, "Oh, anarchy is bad." He lets you mull it over, and you see what V is advocating for, and you see what the Northspire people are advocating for. One idea does seem better than the other, but Alan Moore still leaves it up to you to decide, and that's what I like. Like he's great at presenting these ideas without directly commenting on whether they're good or bad, and he lets the reader decide, what direction to head into. Another great element of this book is V's character. V is a disturbed vigilante seeking vengeance more so than justice, as I just noted. He doesn't want to bring the people at Larkhill to account. He wants to murder them as they destroyed his entire life. They imprisoned him in a concentration camp, they experimented on him, and they left him for dead. And he doesn't want justice. Like, he doesn't want to throw them in jail. He wants to kill them, which he does. He either kills them or leaves them severely damaged in the process. And then he seeks to overthrow the system that allowed that in the first place, the fascist government that took hold. It's very clear that V isn't in the right state of mind either, as he does a lot of heinous things. He blows up buildings, which sometimes you need to do in order to draw attention to a fascist government. But he also kidnaps Evey. She has her freedom, but he also imprisons her and forces her to undergo what Valerie went through in order to teach her a lesson. Now, I'm going to say he absolutely does not need to do that to teach Evey the lesson, because Evey could learn a valuable lesson about fascism and her own loss of freedom without being imprisoned, without being held against her will. And I think that's the point, is that Alan Moore wants you to consider V and how he's very righteous in his actions, because he wants to release Britain from the shackles of oppression. But he also is doing this for vengeance reasons. He's also being a little selfish. So, not completely pure motive there. And you have to wonder, does he truly want to help, or is this just, getting in the way of his vengeance? There's a good quote that I would like to read to you again. "You did this to me. You did this to me. You did this to me. You, oh God, you hit me and you cut off my hair. It was you. It was just you all this time. You tortured me. Oh, you tortured me. Oh God, why? Because I love you. Because I want to set you free," says V. Because set me free. Don't you realize what you did to me? You nearly drove me mad. If that's what it takes, Evey. I hate you. I hate you because you just talk junk and you think you're so good that you don't have to make any sense. You say you love me and you don't, because you just frighten me and torture me for a joke. You want to set me free and you put me in a prison. You are already in a prison. You've been in a prison all your life. Shut up. I don't want to hear it. I wasn't in a prison. I was happy. I was happy until you threw me out. Happiness is a prison, Evey. Happiness is the most insidious prison of all. That's warped and evil and wrong. And of course, Evey does eventually come around to see his side of things, but she has a great point. He threw her in a prison, he beat and tortured her, and he doesn't make a lick of sense at times. Like he's very like carefree and aloof, but he can't just treat people like that. And so you have to wonder, is what are his motives pure, and do they even need to be pure in the first place? That's a question I guess I could present to you. A good element of the story is I think Watchmen was made at the same time. So something that comes to mind as I'm reading this is the character of Rorschach. Rorschach and V have a lot of similarities. V was tortured and suffered a deep mental break, and he sees the oppression in Britain. He views that the only way to take care of this is through anarchy. And so he engages in acts of terrorism and kidnapping people and just and doing a lot of violence in order to get his point across. Meanwhile, Rorschach, he suffered some mental trauma as a child, but when he became a superhero later in life, he came to realize that the only way to truly take care of the murderers and rapists and serial killers in this world is to kill them. It's the only morally sane action to do, because if you don't, they're just going to do what they're doing later on. And so he has to introduce violence into this violent world in order to create some sense of justice, that there even is justice to be found in this world. So very similar in these characters, resorting to violent and extreme means in order to accomplish their goals. I would say V definitely has the more optimistic view of the world, because he believes that there can be change, whereas I think Rorschach doesn't necessarily believe that there can be change at all. And so it's interesting how Alan Moore created both of these characters, who feel similar but are different enough that you get like a different perspective on extremism in the world, I guess. So again, wonderful writing on Alan Moore's part, and wonderful characterization to create someone like V, who is so different and so interesting, and he's not like a pure of heart vigilante, like as you would expect from this kind of story, but he has layers, and there's a lot to think about there. Another thing about the story that I like is how Alan Moore brings up the idea of fascism, or he discusses fascism, looks deep into it, and notes how it can sometimes be hypocritical, because some of the fascist characters in the story go on and on about how the United Kingdom, like there's no room for LGBT people in the United Kingdom, because we got to be pure of sexuality and whatnot. But some of the people in charge are gay themselves, so a bit hypocritical. And then there's a priest who spreads the white supremacist message and also the message of Christianity, but he's a pedophile behind the scenes. So a lot of characters in this fascist government advocating for their way of life, while also engaging in deviant behavior behind the scenes, stuff that they sought to criminalize. But it's okay, because they're the people in charge, and they can do whatever it is they so choose to do. And that's what you see in fascist governments. With Donald Trump in particular, more recently, how he was like, oh, the left is doing all these bad things, but a lot of the times the things that he was drawing attention to was stuff that he was already doing himself. Like, he broke the law countless times, and a lot of the times people, hyper conservatives will be like, being gay is wrong, and then later it'll be found out that they're gay. And so it's okay if they're gay, but they have to oppress the others who are out and about, because a fascist government needs to be strong, or something like that. And so I like the commentary that Alan Moore makes on the fascist government, in this case Northspire. It especially seems very relevant to today, because you're seeing a lot of fascist uprisings and fascist governments like Northspire trying to bring about fascism and right-wing governments into the world. And so Alan Moore was pretty spot on here with his prediction, although it wasn't much of a prediction, because the Thatcher government at the time, and especially the goddamn Reagan government, like they were already engaging in this kind of thing, hyper surveillance and oppressing minorities, particularly with Reagan just letting gay people die during the AIDS crisis. So a lot to think about there, and how it applies to our world, even though it takes place in a fictional, like, dystopia. There are a couple things that I don't like about the story. Going back to the art, I'm not a big fan of the art. You'll probably see some of it throughout here, but the art is very boring. It doesn't stand up to what I've seen with other Alan Moore works, particularly with The Killing Joke, which has lovely art, and Watchmen, which is very vibrant and colorful, and I appreciate that about that comic book. But this is dark, which I guess you could say applies to the theme of dystopia and fascism, but it's still kind of boring and bland, and I kind of expect more from Alan Moore in particular. So, that's something I didn't like about it. And then I also think that Moore writes complete nonsense at times, particularly with V's dialogue. And that's a lot of the point. V is mentally unstable, and so, like, of course he's going to say complete nonsense at times. But other characters just say nonsense too, and there's a lot of side plots, much like in Watchmen, that go nowhere and don't really make a lot of sense to me. And so, that's a problem that Alan Moore has. He has a tendency to go on with some side plots that don't add any actual value to the story, and I guess they have deeper meaning, but nobody asked for them in particular. And so that's another problem that I had. It doesn't completely ruin the book, but it does, make it hard to read at times. Those are my thoughts on V for Vendetta by Alan Moore. A wonderful book, one that I'm going to recommend despite its problems. I'm sure you could overcome the art and the sometimes bad writing, but I think it makes up for it with the story that he's telling, and with the character of V, who is brilliant. Evey doesn't make a lot of sense as a character, and I feel like she could be replaced with literally anybody else. But she's still an interesting character too. There's a lot there, even if she just seems like an extension of V himself. So definitely recommend go seek this out if you can find it. It's one of the best pieces of comic book literature out there. And if you read this before, or you simply want to comment on my review, comment below. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about Alan Moore and V for Vendetta. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this book if they haven't done so already. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your virtuous and victorious and voluminous travels. Farewell.